All right, everybody, I've got 10 o'clock on the dot, so we'll go ahead and get going. I know there'll be a few folks that are jumping on. As you just heard, I'm going to go ahead and record this and we'll have it available for the folks who weren't able to join us. Sorry for the short notice. I appreciate all the folks that are joining us on that 1 day notice, but obviously yesterday's news was exciting enough that we wanted to share it with everybody and kind of have a second to be able to answer some questions and sort of elaborate a little bit on the details of it. So I did send out that link from Treasury to the summary of the final rule. It's still 44 pages as a summary. So, but it does a good job of sharing the changes that they made. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Everybody see that? Oh, of course it hides my taskbar here, sorry. All right, so the biggest part of this news that came out yesterday, and I shared with my wife, I said, have you ever worked on a project for a really long time and put a lot of energy and effort and worry into it? And then somebody said, oh, never mind, but it was actually a good thing. That's kind of where we're at with lost revenue calculations. So whereas we've talked extensively about, making sure that everybody went through the lost revenue calculation to start this process, because it gave you the most string-free use and ability to use your ARPA funds. What they did with this final rule that was rolled out yesterday is they've created a $10 million standard loss of revenue claimable amount. So I'll read this section for those who hadn't had a chance to yet. Recipients may elect a standard allowance of $10 million to spend on government services through the period of performance. Under this option, which is newly offered in the final rule, Treasury presumes that up to $10 million in revenue has been lost due to public health emergency, and recipients are permitted to use that amount not to exceed your award amount, obviously, to fund government services. The standard allowance provides an estimate of revenue loss that is based on an extensive analysis of average revenue loss across states and localities, offers a simple, convenient way to determine revenue loss, particularly for smaller recipients. All recipients may elect to use this standard allowance instead of calculating lost revenue using the formula below, including those with total allocations of $10 million or less. Electing the standard allowance does not increase or decrease recipients' total allocation. So basically what that means for all of our cities and towns here in Wyoming, Cheyenne, I believe, was the only recipient that received more than $10 million. Everybody else was below that line. So this basically opens up any ARPA funding that you got to be calculated as lost revenue. The lost revenue calculation, of course, as we talked about that, the reason that was important is then you weren't stuck in those specific categories of public health emergency response, infrastructure spending on, water, wastewater, broadband, or stormwater. They obviously had some bonus pay for frontline workers that was available. But so they've opened that up basically to where you can use it for anything considered general government services. So this section here on page 11, spending on government services, recipients can use SLFRF funds on government services up to the revenue loss amount, whether that be the standard allowance amount or the amount calculated above, or using the above approach. That was for if you had a bigger than $10 million loss and you were going to calculate that and still claim the extra. Government services generally include any service traditionally provided by a government, unless Treasury has stated otherwise. Here are some common examples, though this list is not exhaustive. Construction of schools and hospitals, road building and maintenance, other infrastructure, health services, general government administration staff and administrative facilities, environmental remediation, provision of police, fire, and other public safety services, including the purchase of fire trucks and police vehicles, Government services is the most flexible eligible use category under SLFRF. Under the SLFRF program, and funds are subject to streamlined reporting and compliance requirements, which is also incredibly good news. Recipients should be mindful that certain restrictions, which are detailed further in the restrictions on use section, apply to all uses of funds, apply to governments, and apply to government services as well. Okay, so again, this is beneficial on two fronts. Obviously, a lot of the calls and the concerns and the discussion that I've had with different communities has been about ideas that they've had on spending of their ARPA funds and how to stay inside the sideboards of the Treasury guidance. This really removes those sideboards to a very great extent. There are just a few exceptions, and I'll go ahead and scroll down here in just a moment and share those. See if I can just get this to tab. Yeah. Okay. So one thing that folks have asked about, and again, you've got a lot of latitude with it being considered lost revenue, but even if you wanted to stay within sideboards, one thing we've gotten a lot of questions on, the city of Cheyenne, and it was in the press, so a lot of folks read about it around the state, decided to use it. Not small percentage of their, I would think it was about a quarter of their ARPA dollars to do a basically a one-time retention bonus for the city employees of Cheyenne. Like a lot of other employers around the country and in the state as well, frankly, right now. That's one of the reasons the governor recommended a raise for all the state employees too. They're just having a hard time with retention, especially as the economy's opened back up. You know, and especially in and around Cheyenne, there's a lot of opportunities, different industries, and sometimes some upward moves that are available to people. So they wanted to give some incentive for folks to stick around. But this section here, supporting and retaining public sector workers, this third item, providing worker retention incentives, including reasonable increases in compensation to persuade employees to remain with employers compared to other employment options. Retention incentives must be entirely additive to an employee's regular compensation, narrowly tailored to need, and should not exceed incentives traditionally offered by the recipient or compensation that alternative employers may offer to compete for the employees. Treasury presumes that retention incentives that are less than 25% of the rate of base pay for an individual or 10% for a group or category of employees are reasonably proportional to the need to retain employees as long as other requirements are met. So say you knew that your public works or your water operators were behind the curve a little bit on kind of industry standard pay. You can actually do up to a 10% raise for those groups, 25% for individual. Now, again, with the government, with the ability to write off your funds as loss, you're kind of free to do those things too. But it does kind of categorize it a little bit and give some direction that way. So restrictions of use, as they mentioned above, the subsections here basically stayed the same. Even if it's opened up as lost revenue, these were the very few sideboards that they had for any lost revenue spending that could not be done and not have them basically look to get reimbursed for your ARPA funding. So offset a reduction in net tax revenue. Now this one, as far as I know, is still maybe working its way through the courts. This basically says that you can't offer a tax break with your ARPA funding or to offset with your ARPA funding. There were several states that sued the federal government over this one. And again, I have not heard the written resolution of that in the courts, but it is working its way through the courts. Deposits into pension funds. This one doesn't necessarily affect a lot of our city governments. Would have affected the state because they would have loved to have been able to use some ARPA money to help out the Fire A plan, but they've got some other legislation to hopefully take care of that, but can't put it into a pension fund. No debt service, since SLFRF funds are intended to be used prospectively. Recipients may not use those funds for debt service or replenishing financial reserves. So you can't put it in your rainy day fund. No satisfaction of settlements or judgments, satisfaction of any obligation arising under pursuant to a settlement agreement, judgment, consent decree, or judicially confirmed debt. Restructuring in a judicial administrative regulatory proceeding is itself not an eligible use. However, if a settlement requires the recipient to provide services or incur other costs that are eligible use of SLFRF funds, SLFRF may be used for those costs. And then just a couple other general restrictions. SLFRF may not be used for a project that conflicts with or contravenes the purpose of the American Rescue Plan Act statute. Uses of funds that undermine COVID-19 mitigation practices in line with CDC guidance and recommendations. So basically, you can't use it to fund any programs that are actively trying to push back against the COVID mitigation efforts of the federal government. So those are the only restrictions of use. So again, this really does open the funding up for your use at your discretion on those general government services, which again they categorize as any traditional service provided by any municipality. So again, extremely good news. We will have some more. I just got a webinar scheduled yesterday for February 3rd. The state that we've talked a few times about the state ARPA coordinator or consultant that the state was looking to hire. They have made that hire. Clifton Larson Allen, which I sent out an invite for a webinar that they're doing, I believe, next week. And I was going to send out a quick reminder today on that. But the Clifton Larson Allen's a firm. We've got some local representation. It's a nationwide firm, but they do have an office in Denver. They are the state ARPA consultant or a coordinator. They've got some exciting stuff coming up. I will let them explain all the ins and outs of what they're contractually obligated to do for the municipalities and counties when we have that meeting on the 3rd. But just as a little bit of a teaser, there's some they're looking to set up a dashboard website that'll be available, that'll have resources. They're going to be doing a lot of training. They will be at Winter Conference the 24th of February down here in Cheyenne as part of that. Obviously, this change as of yesterday even changes what I had talked to them about programming at that winter conference, because we had intended on spending about half the time they were going to present on guidance and spending within the guidance. And again, this change really, kind of takes that need away. So we'll focus more on the reporting end. Of course, that first reporting deadline that got moved from October is rapidly approaching in April. And we want to make sure everybody's ready for that. Of course, we had that webinar on the ID.me process. If folks have still not had a chance to get through that, we do recommend that you take the time and get through that process sooner rather than later, because there's certainly certainly the possibility that they may get a little log jammed as we get close to that deadline, and all the folks that have sort of put it off are rushing to the gate. So with that, I'm going to drop the share screen here. Mayor Meyer, the name of the company is Clifton Larson Allen. And again, we'll have that webinar on the 3rd of February with them. That'll be available to everybody to come meet those folks. And I'm going to draw a blank on her last name. Dave, maybe you can help me out. Allison's last name. Dave's drawing the same blank. So, but our main point of contact with them, we met her the other day, and excellent mind. She knows ARPA absolutely inside and out. She's actually CPA, and has spent a lot of time studying the guidance and those kinds of things, which again, another case of, spending a lot of time and effort and energy and worry on something that, you get told isn't a worry anymore. So
Allison's life.
Thank you, Dave. I appreciate that.
You bet. Sorry, it took me a minute.
No, that's okay. I should have had it in my notes. Does anybody else have any other questions?
Justin, if I may, just I think the state's consultant is. We had a Zoom meeting with Allison the other day, and I think she and the state representatives, and I think we're going to be really glad to have them on board. I think they're going to be very helpful.
Yeah,
and by the way, the state, big props to the state for including us in the use of those consultants.
Yeah,
all of you.
Yeah, certainly wasn't anything they had to do, and the state's using their services too. It's not something that's specifically, that they were only providing for us. The state's using them as well, but the fact that they included us and the counties, and in the contract and in the request for proposal was definitely a solid on their part, because these folks don't come cheap. So it was nice of them to be helpful.
Justin, I have a question here in Du Bois. Is this Allison, is that somebody that we can contact directly, or is there another person that we need to kind of contact for specific questions before it goes to that consultant?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, Mayor. I posed that to, we had our meeting with her and with the counties and some other folks. It was a little bit more of a group discussion on Tuesday, and then I got a hold of Allison and we spoke on Wednesday specific to the training and whatnot for winter conference. And I posed that question to her too. I said, I wanted to really get an idea of, sort of the level of customer service offered, I guess would be a way of framing it. Was this something where, they wanted to receive phone calls from, every municipality and county in the state, like individually for questions, or was it a little broader, a little higher level than that? I think that's the intention, is it's a little higher level. I think they're still going to be available, but I think they kind of want to, just for the sake of efficiency, kind of channel questions through the respective organizations. That's sort of why they brought, WAM into it, brought WCCA into it, was the idea that we could, kind of be the funnel a little bit. And the state's doing that too. Edie Troutwine, who of course is the deputy auditor for the state, is the one that called that meeting that we had Tuesday to introduce these folks to us in the counties. And she's basically doing that for the state. Her and Kevin Hibbert in the budget department are the ones that are taking questions from the executive branch and from, legislators and anybody else. And they're the ones that are kind of funneling those questions as a single point of contact. That said, they, again, this webinar on the 3rd will be just kind of the first step of what they want to do and provide for us educationally. They want, we've talked about the delivery mechanisms. They were keen to be there for winter conference and to be able to, meet people face to face, make some points of contact. But they do want to do a pretty extensive slate of webinar offerings. Kathy, to your question in the chat, the webinar on the 11th is actually something that's being presented by National Clifton Larson Allen. It's not just the Denver office that's putting that on. So as far as I know, that will go on as scheduled.
Justin, if I may add to what you just said regarding Mayor Meyer's question, if you get a question to us, we can get it in front of them real quick and get an answer back to you. And furthermore, I think that'll be advantageous, because there may be others that have the same question. So when you send us a question, we can get in front of them and get an answer back to you right away and get it out to the rest of the members. And I think, Justin, that they're compiling some FAQs, correct?
Yeah, and that was the other intent in the discussions that we had, is they intend to build an FAQ database that'll be available on that municipal dashboard. So obviously a lot of questions are going to be the same, especially on specific processes like the reporting. A lot of people are going to hit the same roadblock. So they want to, as expeditiously as possible, get the answers to those questions posted to that dashboard, so that folks will be able to kind of self-survey answers, in pretty efficient, in a more efficient interaction. You can get to it right away. You don't have to wait for somebody to answer the question. Anybody else? I don't see anything else in the chat.
I just feel totally lost.
Okay. What question can I answer for you?
Well, I signed up for, I don't know what that website was. We had to sign up or create an ID or something, and I did that back in December, and I had problems, and they didn't even have the ARPA outlet on the, nothing about ARPA was on that site for signing up for that ID, so I didn't know what I was doing, really.
For ID Me, for the identification
Yeah.
verification deal? Yeah.
Yeah, they didn't have that up, but I signed up for it, and I think I got an ID,
Okay.
but I don't have an idea.
Yeah, well, so in the ID Me thing, obviously, when we did that webinar, that was one of the things we were trying to, with those folks and the folks from Federal Treasury, was to kind of explain that process and how, how it was a piece of the ARPA reporting. When you have access to your federal portal, you'll log into that federal portal with your ID Me credentials, basically, so that they'll know that they'll know that you've been through that process. And then when you go to fill out and assign your roles and all of that stuff, then you'll already be credentialed and have the ability to do that, or kind of the administrative status to do that.
So really, it's just all that was just to be able to log in and authenticate and everything.
Yeah, it's you're just basically, it's just like setting up an account, with pretty much any other website. Just a little more, obviously, a little deeper dive and a little more stringent vetting process. But yeah, you're basically just signing up to have your having your credentials in line, so that when the federal portal does open, you'll be recognized, and they'll automatically be able to give you that administrative status.
So this news today, by the way, I think is huge in terms of to eliminate some confusion in that essentially, this is, I think this is a decent comparison. I've been comparing this to taking the standard deduction on your income taxes or itemizing. Whereas if your itemization was going to be less than the standard deduction anyway, you would just take the standard deduction. In this case, if you're getting less than $10 million worth of ARPA funds, it sounds like, and stay tuned in case there's a wrinkle, but if you're getting less than $10 million, it sounds like as long as you spend that on general government purposes and don't spend it on those three things that are not allowed, that you're going to be in the clear. And it's going to be pretty easy to report on your reporting. I understand you'll just be able to put general government, the amount and that you're spending it on, and what you're spending it on, and tag it the reason or the category general government purpose. One thing which is absolutely a local decision, so this is just some friendly advice, is this is one-time money. This is one-time money, and so it would be good advice not to spend it on, not to use it for to create recurring expenses. It's unfortunate that they took away three of the things that are usually good for, to use one-time money on. But you do want to be careful not to paint yourself into a corner as you spend these monies that won't be recurring, not to create, not yet, for example, hire another 20 people because you'll have to pay for those 20 people after this is done. So anyway, just a little, again, a local decision, but a little friendly advice. Make sure that you're thinking long-term in terms of the impact of how you're spending the money.
Yeah, and I think it's good advice too to still, obviously when we've had interaction with National League of Cities earlier in this process, they really recommended, bring your constituents into this discussion if you haven't already about where these dollars are going to be invested, even though this really kind of opens it up as to how those dollars can be spent. It is still one-time money that a good portion of the public has heard about. So I think it's still a good idea, and prudent best practice to make sure that you're still, if you've already started a process of public dialogue on how these funds might be invested, or are still planning to, I would definitely recommend that you keep with that, even though they've removed some of the constraints on what it can be put towards. Dave, you might be able to help me on this one a little bit. Trudy from Evanston, on the pay retention incentives, what is the best way to determine if your employees' pay is in line with what it should be without doing a formal pay study? Do you know of any resources maybe that information could be found a little more readily?
I don't know, where you might find that's going to be fairly local. The biggest tip off is going to be if people are leaving. Then, for example, your local PD probably already had pressure from folks leaving for the state police, for the highway patrol rather. And I think that, without doing a study, I don't know that there is a specific resource that can go and tell you what a water operator in rural Wyoming should make. But again, I think you'll have, I think you can, if you look and your workforce is pretty stable, then you're probably not having a problem. If you have people leaving, that'll be a pretty quick heads up for you.
Yeah. And as Rose mentioned there, ask other communities similar size to share their pay data with you. That is public information that's published as well. So with a little bit of digging, you can do a little bit of local canvassing anyway, without a whole lot. I did the question 2 from Lori up in 10 Sleep on the ID.me process. I know that feels incredibly intrusive. I did have a conversation with one of the advisors from Senator Lummis's office that I believe had talked to you about it. Unfortunately, with this process and the way that it's set up and the way that it, the ball's already so far down the field on this deal, I don't think they're going to rethink, that the need for that verification for this. The one thing that I did stress to the advisor from the senator's office was, if the federal government is going to need or want this information going forward for, say, other programs, say if you were going to administer or apply for a grant through USDA or through HUD or some of these other entities that our municipalities have occasion to work with, that hopefully they could kind of come to an agreement or have it be their goal to use one identification service basically, or one contractor for this, so that you're not being asked to sign up with the next one, the next one, the next one. If they decide that ID.me does a good job, for what they need, if that could be the one identification verification service, so that then you wouldn't have to go back through it. You wouldn't have to spread your information around to other entities. and of course, just ease of use, because there's going to be a lot of other grant opportunities, obviously with the infrastructure bill and some of the programs involved with that. Just here over the next several years, there's going to be a lot of different things where even communities that haven't had a whole lot of interaction necessarily with the federal government on grants and grant applications and grant management may end up having the need to do so.
You know, Justin, one more comment that probably is self-evident is, you know, it may not just be other communities that are stealing your, you know, that where your employees might be going for another job. I mean, it may be folks not, you know, maybe private sector jobs locally or other things that, so the competition, you know, could be coming from many directions. In terms of retaining your employees, you may be, you know, maybe trying to retain them from leaving the public sector altogether.
Yeah. Yeah, Lori, just in follow up on your other question there, you know, I think some of this, quite frankly, is maybe a little bit of an over pendulum swing back the other direction. Of course, with the with some of the private loans and whatnot, the PPP stuff. If you followed the news much in the aftermath of that program, there's tons of people currently in court or going to prison because they bought Lamborghinis and yachts with that money. And did some really erroneous and really unwise things. I think you know, after the initial rush of those CARES Act dollars and at the beginning of the pandemic, I think they've tried to be a little more deliberate. And this might be a bit of an overcorrection as far as the, you know, how stringent these ID requirements are, but again, it is kind of the process that we're stuck with for this particular program. All right, I've got a couple minutes after 10:30. I didn't intend to keep you guys real long this morning, but I did want to have an opportunity to kind of elaborate as far as this program and the changes. Judith, I see that question real quick. Is this ID thing the same as SAM? No. ID Me is an identification verification website. If you want to shoot me an email offline, I can get you that information and send you that link from the webinar that we did previously that shows you how to do that sign up and where to go and whatnot. But as always, if anybody has any questions after, feel free to shoot me an email, Dave an email. We're always happy to, or a phone call. We're always happy to talk on these things and elaborate. Again, we'll have that webinar coming up on 3rd of February with Allison from Clifton Larson and Allen to introduce those folks and talk a little bit about what services are going to be available through them. And then we hope everybody can join us at Winter Conference to go through that first big educational presentation from them. So yeah, if there are no other questions, I will let everybody get on with their Friday. I hope everybody had a happy and safe holidays. I know it's our first opportunity to say hello to you after that, and we appreciate you again popping on with us here briefly this morning, and we'll look forward to seeing everybody here in just under a month's time for that webinar on the 3rd of February. Thank you all so much.